Well, great. We'll jump right in. My name is Jack Henderson, former staff with RMS, and we'll be moderating and hosting today. We've got three awesome panelists here to talk about diversity in river management and beyond. We've got Nathan Burrell, the Deputy Director of Government and Community Relations with the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. He grew up in Tappahannock, Virginia, playing in the woods, camping, and building forts with his brother, and has lived in Richmond since 1999, having earned a degree in Parks and Recreation Management from Virginia Commonwealth University. Nathan's worked for the city of Richmond as the city's trails manager, superintendent of the James River Park System, and superintendent of maintenance and operations for the Parks and Recreation Department's Southern Division. We also have Moses Chun with the National Park Service's Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program in Western Pennsylvania, promoting collaborative leadership and community engagement in public land management and conservation. And Moses believes that collaboration and celebrating diversity is tied to improving workplace culture and innovation. And he hopes to see a shift towards more creative problem solving in modern land management challenges through leadership development. And also Risa Shimoda, who has served as the executive director for RMS, River Management Society, for over 10 years. And during her tenure, RMS has really changed how the organization pursues its mission to redefining the interpretation of river management itself to embrace all professionals whose work serves the wise, holistic future of freshwater that moves towards the sea. She's a reliable source for creative yet pragmatic solutions in her work and her life. So with that, we'll jump right in. Thanks so much for being here. As y'all might know, please keep your microphone muted and feel free to direct questions to the chat box. And we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end, which can be done directly or through the chat. Thanks.
All right. So before we get started, we just want to do a couple of tech check, make sure everybody has their cameras or microphones going. You don't have to be on camera, but if we want to make this participatory. So when you're comfortable or speaking, we ask that you come online and share your thoughts with us. We also ask that you just be mindful of the mute button that you have, and that we are also utilizing chat. It's a great way to have good, relevant side conversations and a good space for folks that process information, not just by listening or speaking, but sometimes it makes more sense when you're writing it out. So make full use of that. And we want this to be a space for us to grow today and process fully, what the implications are of what we're talking about today. And I'm really excited to be here. Okay. Risa, why don't you kick us off real quick right here?
Yeah, so the work of inclusion, it's for no one is sort of above it or beyond it or below it. And so wherever you are today, we're going to just look at where we are. So that's a little difficult, but hopefully as a group, we'll be able to take a look in the mirror and see where we as individuals are. Just talk about some super fundamental effects of equality, equity, and justice, and share some groundbreaking equity work from one state government agency, which I think will be awesome that everybody can take home with them. And then we're going to practice 3 levels of work in a framework that gives you some concrete, meaningful steps towards change, regardless of how much experience you have had and how excited, afraid of, and or kind of anxiously interested in this work, because it's difficult and it's important. Next slide.
Yeah, and so the first thing we thought we would start with today, we have the next couple hours here, so there's no rush at all. We thought we would ask you, when was the last time that you felt seen, heard, and respected? So when did you last feel seen, heard, and respected, both in your personal world, in your personal relationships, or your professional ones, with maybe a project partner or a colleague? What kind of group was it? So we're going to put a little link in the chat take a couple minutes to think about this and reflect on it. And we want to hear your thoughts. So let's see if I got that link for you. Jack, do we have that in there?
I think Jack sent it. Got it?
Yep, it's in the
Great.
chat.
Yeah, so click on that link and let's see if I can get your responses. And we'll just anonymously share our responses right up here on the screen. We ask that, maybe it's a couple sentences, maybe it's a whole paragraph. Take time to think about the last time you felt seen, heard, and respected. And it's helpful to just add some details and context for us, right? What was the environment like? Who was there? What did somebody say to make you feel seen? Or what was it? What happened that made you feel respected? So I'll give a couple minutes to do that. So maybe we'll leave this up running at one of the breaks or as we close today, but thanks for sharing here. But let's not forget this question. We want to go into a breakout session here talking about this exact reflection that we've asked you. Bringing up my share screen again. When was the last time you felt seen, heard, and respected? Jack's going to send us into a couple of breakout rooms, and we're going to ask that you share your story a little more, and you'll be facilitated by one of us. So, Jack, why don't you send us to our rooms? Oh, we see you're muted.
Working on it right now. Should be ready in just a second.
Thank you.
And how much time are we going to have for this? Like 15?
10 or 15 minutes, yeah.
Plenty of time.
I guess that did that not work? Is everyone still here? Shit.
Yeah, we didn't see anything come up yet.
Okay, just 1 second here. It should have gone. Let's see. Let's close all rooms. Okay, give me 1 second here. Here we go. Okay. All right, I'm just gonna make sure that everyone's split up. Okay. Should have received an invitation to the room. Is anyone here with me?
It was, well, two things come to mind. One was this morning, I called up a Park Service colleague who I've never met. Well, I have met her, but just to talk about potential jobs. And she really listened to me, explored my background, answered questions, seemed very interested. And so we had nice dialogue, and yeah. Yeah.
What was it about that conversation that you felt so heard or seen or respected? What do you think it was?
Answering my questions very honestly and actively, actively listening, trying to, actively listening by asking more questions and getting more in depth. And then when I asked her questions, she also felt free to share and talk about the ins and outs, ups and downs, that kind of thing. So
yeah,
it was just an honest conversation. How's that sound?
Thanks. Thanks, Jack. Yeah, well, you can.
Hey there, this is Jack. I'm moderating this session. We're actually in breakout rooms right now, so I'm just going to assign you to one, and they'll fill you in on what all we're working on.
Oh, I had to jump off. I'm joining a little late. I'm just trying to join the link for this first session that I wanted to participate in.
You're correct. Yeah, we've gone into breakout rooms. So I'm just going to put you into one of those breakout rooms here. It's just smaller groups within the session. 1 second. There you go.
Looks like we have somebody new joining us. If you can come off mute and let us know who you are, introduce yourself, and then I'll share what we're doing here.
Are you talking to me? I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Hi.
Hi.
Tell us your name, where you're from,
Shannon.
and then hi, Shannon. There you are.
I work for the BLM out of Boise, Idaho.
Oh, that's right. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks.
We're asking and sharing a little bit about the last time we felt seen, heard, and respected. Lily and Jimmy have already gone. I'll go next, and then I'll give you time to think a little bit about your response. Share as much or as little as you'd like. And then, Jack, we have time for you too. So if you want to go as well, I'll make some space for you. For me, this question, and even preparing about it, I can think of a number of different times, but it's usually in the backdrop of not being, you feel it most when you haven't been seen or heard or respected, right? And I was thinking back particularly and most vividly to a time when I was in a summer internship program, I think it's like 7 or 8 years ago, actually. And I was sharing housing with 8 other people, and we're all in this program together. And in a space that's so, you have peers and colleagues that are alongside you all the time, 24/7. You kind of, everything blends in. And the part that made me feel seen, heard, and respected in that part was the mentor for that program scheduled his time just for these 20-minute to 30-minute check-ins, one-on-one, and that could take up more than half a day. And even though I knew it was scheduled and that it was somewhat of a it was a task for him, right?
Hey, Chris, this is Jack. I'm moderating this session. We're in breakout rooms right now, so I'm just going to add you to one of those breakout rooms where they're discussing a topic.
Cool, thanks.
There you go. You should, should have received an invite there.
Respond to questions like Lelia said. I thought that was really nice. So yeah, Shannon, you want to go next? You have a thought of when you last felt seen, heard, and respected?
Yeah, I feel really lucky because I feel that every day. Great team of people that I work with. I think really we don't always have to agree with each other, but we respect each other. We watch what we say to people. You really need to think before you say, and don't assume that, you're not going to offend anyone. And then just, like really actively listening and repeating what people say, like you were just talking about. And I think when you can show you respect others and listen to them, they'll treat you the same way. So, yeah, not everything is perfect. And sometimes I feel like people at the upper levels aren't listening, but
right.
They have their own issues that maybe don't necessarily know that they have to deal with in terms of who they report to and what their responsibilities are. So, yeah, I feel really lucky.
Thanks.
So.
Jack, you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity. I'll be fairly brief. Just keeping an eye on the participants. We have some people coming in later on, and I want to make sure I shepherd them to a breakout room and they don't get left out in the Zoom ether. But yeah, for me, it's as simple as, having someone come to me, for advice or for some sort of professional input or just a question in general. I definitely feel very respected and seen when someone might see me as some sort of potential asset in terms of information or content to contribute or things of that nature. I used to work for RMS for a number of years and loved the opportunity working there. And now I've just been doing a variety of consulting work, mostly in GIS and mapping, a lot of which for recreation groups and conservation groups and river-based endeavors. And it's gotten to a point to where I feel, or other people feel like I'm a knowledge source on a particular type of information, specifically GIS relating to rivers and maps and things like that. And so I feel very respected and seen and heard, for that matter, when someone comes to me and asks a question. And on the flip side, that I'm able to respond to that and have something to contribute back. And if my input is valued, it's a good feeling for sure, especially being someone who's fairly young in their career, kind of getting more into a settled spot. But for a long time, it felt very much like if I had an opinion to offer, it wasn't disrespected, but wasn't necessarily heard or appreciated as much, just because based on my short time being a part of something. And so now having something heard a bit more it feels really good, and I'm grateful for that. And on the flip side, I try to make sure that I do the same for other people, whether they be older or younger or at whatever experience level. But yeah, thanks for the chance to contribute.
Thanks, Jack. That's great. Yeah, and as you monitor everyone, feel free to pull us back after like a minute or two warning, and we'll meet in the back bigger room. Yeah, so we just want to spend some time for us to get to know each other and think about this question. I think it's central to when we talk about what does it mean to increase diversity or to celebrate diversity? What does it mean to make actions that are inclusive? And we thought, hey, it comes down to this question of in all of, hopefully, or most of your spaces, are there opportunities? Is everyone, not just you, being seen, heard, and respected? I love what Jack said, is that maybe people aren't always agreeing with me, or I think Shannon, you also said that, like we don't always agree with each other, or not everyone is going to take your ideas, but is that space, acknowledging it, understanding it truly when you're speaking, and not just shrugging it off. And I think it's more complicated than practicing social skills like repeating people but like these are personal relationship questions that we ask of each other to create an inclusive work environment. So yeah, we thought we would just think about these questions and make a personal connection to this question, as this work is hugely personal. Yeah.
Are you all set to go back to the main group, or anything more here? Just looking at the.
No, I think we're ready. Yeah, if you can pull the other groups to see if they're feeling good.
Yeah, a last comment. I think Moses, you said it. It's you want to look at the positive, but you notice it when you're not being heard, respected, valued. That's when you notice it. And I can speak personally also when I'm not doing that. I think I have become aware of,
And so, these conversations have been critically important to breaking down barriers, understanding biases, just understanding, again, the world and the changes that, we are currently living in and experiencing. I think a lot of people have been really craving that. But the main piece here is, the common thread. These are things that we all need in order to be heard, seen, and respected. Again, this isn't just a work thing. This isn't just your everyday lives. These are the things that we all need. And we've established some commonality here that, we all need open, honest dialogue. We, sharing our vulnerabilities, really being able to talk to our friends, our colleagues, about the work that we're doing, how we're doing it, and having them say, you know what, yeah, that's a really good idea. Man, how did you do that? Those are all commonalities that, again, cuts across racial boundaries, ethnic boundaries, socioeconomic boundaries. These are commonalities that we all need in our lives. And so the more that we understand that we're more alike than we are different, the stronger we're going to be coming out on the backside of this. How much longer do we have in our breakout here?
Hey, y'all, I was just checking in with y'all. I think the other groups are about ready to go back, but just figured to get a minute or two. If y'all are at a good stopping point, then I'll bring us back here.
How do you guys feel? Good?
Good.
Awesome.
Just begun, but good.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
They'll close here in about a minute. I'll head on back. Thank y'all.
Jack, you did that so gently. Thank you.
We should be coming back here to the main room, and hopefully no one's left out in the ether. I think we're all just about back.
You're doing awesome, Jack.
Shannon, I'm so sorry we got yanked just as you're finishing your comp, but I would love to have you share with the rest of the group if you want to finish your thought.
Oh, I was just saying that, everyone likes to be respected, but in terms of communicating in this day and age and to be ordered to be seen or heard or, respected, it's like I communicate with different employees differently. Like some people need more communication, face-to-face actions, whereas others are super independent. I check in with them once a week. We don't even need to turn our cameras on and they're good to go. So everyone's different. And that's all I really wanted to say.
Thanks for that. And I'm sorry, everybody, for wrapping up our talk all together.
Yeah, sorry if I cut anybody off. It was hard to coordinate all at once there.
I'm going to pass it to Risa.
Okay, where are we here? So I know we talked a little bit about this in our session, but what's really important to begin to communicate well with those, and more important, the more different they are from you. So with one person, the person is different, and the more different, the more important this is. A couple of different types of empathy. The one that we probably think about a lot is understanding how someone else feels, trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Another level of it is actually feeling that person's feelings so that you can actually share their emotions, so that you don't just acknowledge it, but you can actually walk around in their shoes a little bit with them. And then the kind of extension of that is if you are, if you're in a situation where you're working together or living, with the people, or they're a member of your church or something, moving actually into action. So you're acknowledging what's going on with that person or persons. You've experienced sharing it and actually move into action, or helping them move into action themselves. So it's more from kind of passive to actually pretty active. And so why is this important? For ourselves, I'm going to have you just continue, kind of slowly advance, Moses. So, let's looking in the mirror, having a healthy perspective. Empathy is important for us to learn about ourselves, and to remember, what we're learning, and then also better understanding the perception others have of us, as well as understanding what's going on with them. In our organizations, it's a little more complicated, but a good level of empathy allows people to know what's going on and think that what is fair, and if it's not unfair, they understand it. Actions are more predictable, and if you're either a peer who is in a position of influence, or certainly a supervisor, it's easier if you know what's going on with folks to motivate others towards a higher level of performance. And then maybe the most important part, you're good, is dealing with something when something goes sideways. If you know where everyone's coming from, it's easier to deal with the conflict. And then one, further level with those who we in whose communities we live or partners that we're working with. Empathy is important for a variety of reasons. Go ahead. Again, others understand you as well as you thinking you understand them, which you may. It's easier to engage those that you've never met before, which I think a lot of us have to do in the jobs that we have. It's a big ask, so it's important to be kind of on the same page as those who are you're working with. And then knowing that partnerships benefit all parties. The sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's often when you're working with a new group, new people you're not familiar with, and you're thinking, man, this is like a heavy load to get to know them in order for me to be successful working with them. Like, it's totally worth it. A lot of work, totally worth it. So there's a variety. You can just click through these. You're not born with it. You learn it by practice. Listening, being present, smiling really helps a lot, particularly if you're nervous or uncertain. Smiling helps a ton. Using people's names. If you ever tried that, that's really amazing. You know, you see a neighbor or someone you pass by at the bus stop or something like that, and when you mention their name, demeanor is totally different.
If I can interrupt you just for a second too on that one, is also to practice and make effort to even pronounce names properly is incredibly important to recognizing an individual's identity. And even after you've been corrected, if you're not making an effort to honor that correction, it feels incredibly disrespectful, which is counter to what we try to do, but often I think it gets overlooked. So I just wanted to also like lay that one down where you know, we're going to mess up people's pronunciations of names all the time as a given, but like, you know, it's worth practice. Absolutely.
It's like when if you've been to a place where the language is different and you don't know the language, but you try. You say, you know, manana instead of manana, and you're trying, and people who are there understand that you're at least trying, instead of like not saying it. So as Moses mentioned, trying, it allows true recognition that you're trying to connect. And one of the more difficult things is, again, it's more all of this is more difficult when things are not rosy and going swimmingly well. So challenge yourself to have a deep conversation with a colleague, maybe about a conversation that passed by and was ignored, or something that you sense and should be addressed, because the benefit you'll yield a fabulous benefit even though you're nervous about it. It's worth practicing.
With that, you know, we've been going at this, if you've joined us starting from 1 o'clock, almost an hour. We want to give you a 5-minute break, just to take care of whatever needs you have, and we'll come back here at the top of the hour, get into more of the content that we have prepared for you today. So anything to add before we go, Risa?
No, we're going to hang out though, you know, so if you aren't leaving, feel free to stay and we can talk about this. And we're going to go through a little loop of a familiar cartoon and a few alternatives to this familiar image that help tell the story that we're working on today.
All right, we'll see you at the top of the hour.
Where's Lilia? What were you saying in the chat?
Did you see it?
I try to pronounce people's names, but I'm bad. Oh, I know.
Yeah, and then I don't want to have to ask again, or I know that I'm going to butcher it or come close to butchering it, and then it's just sort of this awkward feeling for myself.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, it's unrealistic to think that we're linguistics experts, and that's what's required sometimes with some names. You know, Moses, I'm sure you've experienced this. I get so mad, but I never remember when there are names that are backwards in United States, but they're the other way, like Korean names.
Yep.
So I don't know if I should call you Mr. Moses or Mr. Chun, you know, and with yours, it's a little bit easier, but when they're both kind of endemic, that's difficult. If you don't remember, like you need a cheat sheet. You don't want it. You don't want, you know, you don't know what you don't know, and you insult people and you don't realize it. So you
And-
smile.
Well,
Right.
and I think that's why it's okay to ask, is that it's part of being seen, heard, and respected. Is if you got it wrong, even asking and practicing together is, I think it's a little uncomfortable, yes, but I think it's it creates that environment where people realize that, hey, here's someone that's not going to brush this over, right? Let's not overlook or reduce the importance of names to my awkwardness. Like, so I think it's largely about that, and it takes practice for sure.
Yeah.
My little side note, I can think of 2 graduations I've been to, high school graduations, that had a large international component. And it was so refreshing and just great for me that they very intentionally pronounced all the names correctly, including Risa getting of names, you know, somebody's name properly said. I hope that everybody else felt it, but it was great.
Could you tell because there were difficult names and they happened to get them right, or did they say that? Did they actually say that?
Well, okay, from my perspective and not knowing these languages, but it sounded like the person was doing it really well.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's actually a good example, and I'll kind of share, as you know, I've been graduating myself and seen a lot of colleagues graduate recently, and when they do these ceremonies, they'll share the names, and the way that they've been doing these call outs is that, yes, you have one person speaking to announce the name of who's graduating. I noticed that they're asking for the name written as it is normally spelled, and then a phonetic explanation or phonetic way of sounding out the name.
That's good.
So like, for example, Moses, right? Moses. I would write how I want them to pronounce it using just the letters. Mo, M-O-E dash Z-E-S. And then that way people can, so whoever's announcing it can go by that and understand, how do I sound out this name that may not have, been translated or Romanized quite the way that you would say it. So I noticed that as a pattern, and I think it's great. It's not foolproof, but it's a really good effort.
That would help a lot, and not just with maybe new languages that we're learning, but people butcher lots of names that are Estonian at their root, or even just all sorts.
With American names, it's not something that's unique to if you're from another country. There are many people, especially Black and brown individuals, who their names are mispronounced all the time. And just as been stated, I mean, many times there's not even an attempt to correct it. And so again, with the exercise we just went through of being seen, heard, and respected, that's all a part of it. If you can't even say my name right, or even apologize that you got my name wrong and try to get it right, then how are you really seeing me? And you're definitely not respecting me. So yeah, it's that's a commonality, kind of across the board.
Yeah, and I think we often don't realize that these are remnants of a colonial past, right? Wiping clean the diversity of cultures and languages into.
Moses, your volume's really low, I think.
Is it a little better? Can you hear me now? A little better? Yeah, I wanted to say that.
Still a little soft.
Okay, let's see if I can fix this here. How about that? No, kind of, maybe.
It's about the same. It was nice and loud before, but
I wonder why I did that.
can hear you though, just quietly.
How about that? Is that a little
Better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add right before we get started again that the name thing is interesting because the pronunciations, into English, just Romanizing names that came from different cultures, you lose a lot of that translation. And it was never going to be perfect from the start. The nature of translation is sometimes there are no equivalents in the way that we sound things out with our mouths or in the meanings, but that we recognize that the history of these things are tied to colonialism, and we just need to be mindful of that, and that's why it's so important to, like Nathan said, it's core and part of seeing and hearing and respecting.
We could probably do a whole session just
Oh my gosh.
what's in a name, right? I mean, an individual like me, an African American, my name is not my last name. My last name is the name of the slaveholding family that brought my ancestors here. So, there's a lot to unpack in what's in a name.
There's a lot to unpack right there. That's for sure.
All right, so we're at the top of the hour. We'll wait for, I don't know if people are following back up, but we'll get started.
Yeah.
Passing it, you might still see my screen.
All right. Thank you all for coming back. It's 2:04 now, so we'll move into the next segment here. So we're going to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, the Virginia way. Virginia has been leading the way when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just in the outdoors, but across the board. We really see this as, as a paramount opportunity for us. And it's the only way that, quite honestly, as a state, as a nation, that we're going to change the way that we're able to approach longstanding problems, as well as, how are we going to crack this nut of, the escalating environmental degradation that we're seeing? It's going to take all of us in order to do that. And so, Virginia's really started to lead the way here. I want to say before I start, the Virginia way has long stood for a way of government, a way of operating here in Virginia that really spoke to a business-friendly environment, and an environment that was mainly run by wealthy white men. I'm happy to say that Virginia is actively changing this. Now, the Virginia way stands for equity, stands for inclusion, stands for a diverse state that really reflects the values that we all share, which is, again, starting from the beginning, we want to be heard, we want to be seen, we want to be respected. Go ahead to the next slide. So in changing, what the Virginia way means, it is, it's really, you need to understand that it didn't happen overnight. This is something that has been a change that's been going on for about the last 4 years here in Virginia. And that change is really centered around, again, how do we treat people? How do we truly reach our goals where everybody is benefiting from these efforts? And in order to do that, we developed the first in the nation, a diversity, equity, and inclusion office that is centered in the governor's cabinet. This is the first in the nation that we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion cabinet member as a part of state government. That cabinet member is Dr. Janice Underwood. Her and her team quickly, within a year of standing up the office, went to work in developing the One Virginia Plan. The One Virginia Plan really establishes a framework of inclusive excellence that centers around these 5 pillars that you see here. You can go to the next slide. How do we recruit, retain a diverse workforce? These are things that we're all really working, behind the scenes to better understand. How do we ensure that, especially in natural resources, how do we make sure that individuals from diverse backgrounds, experiences, socioeconomic statuses are engaged in this work? Next slide. How do we create and sustain an organization or agency that respects diversity and employs inclusive practices throughout daily operations? How do we embed, how do we weave diversity, equity, and inclusion into the everyday work that we do as department agencies, as agency heads, as program operators? How do we ensure that equity, diversity, and inclusion are just a part of how you do business? Next slide. How do we engage all stakeholders in learning the concepts of DEI and the importance of these concepts to completing the organization's mission? As a natural resource agency, we really have this deep, passionate understanding, about the environment. But we also understand and recognize that in order for us to reach environmental sustainability and move beyond sustainability to where we are regenerating our environment, it's going to take all of us. We can't just engage one segment of the population and expect that, all of the, bad things that flow into our rivers are going to be cured. It's going to take all of us engaged in this work to ensure that we have healthy rivers, a healthy environment, and a place that, our kids and great grandkids can love and enjoy and say, you know what, they did the right thing. Next slide. How do we create and sustain an organizational infrastructure to support accountability and achieving equity for the institutions and the Commonwealth? Again, this is really, what's the organizational structure? Are you allowing for these open, honest conversations to be taking place? Are you truly tackling the issues head on, or are you just sweeping them under the rug? This is really speaking to, again, the accountability piece and also the metrics behind it, because that's an important piece to the One Virginia Plan. The One Virginia Plan really establishes not only a framework for how do you weave these goals of inclusive excellence into your everyday work, but also, how do you as an institution, as an agency, as a program manager, as a division manager, really work to, again, establish goals that have metrics behind them so that we know that we're moving the needle. Next slide. And how do we focus community engagement activities on those that provide measurable, direct, equitable, and sustainable benefits to all of Virginia's diverse communities? Again, if you're not measuring it, you can't really see the change. And so, the metric piece is an important one, because it's easy to establish goals. It's hard to establish the metrics that really move those goals along. And so the framework for inclusive excellence in the One Virginia Plan really develops a framework, not just for each agency within the Commonwealth, but for all colleges, state colleges as well. And even offers opportunities for organizations to be able to plug and play, if you will. And we'll do some of this, towards the end of our session. But really, again, gives you the framework to develop or hang, your DEI initiatives. We recognize that no DEI initiative for a single agency, even within an agency that's as diverse as DCR is, having a one size fits all is never going to do it. And so, having a framework, again, where you can kind of manipulate it, you can massage it, you can own it. It becomes yours. It becomes your organization's. This is what diversity, equity, and inclusion means to us. So now, we have this overarching framework that really kind of guides each of our agencies in developing a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. But, when it comes to this work, it starts at the top. If you don't have your leadership engaged, For us, it happens to be, on high from the governor, through the secretary, and definitely, to our Director Clyde Christman. On your screen, I'm going to read a quote directly from Clyde as we were working to establish our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Here's what he had to say. The fact of the matter is that we, #DCR, are not currently a workforce that is reflective of our constituents. And that's an issue that extends to every underrepresented group. If we are to best serve the citizens of Virginia today and tomorrow, then we need to improve our efforts to attract and recruit employees with different perspectives, identities, backgrounds, and experiences. And let that sink in just for a second, because that's at the crux of what we're talking about here. But it took leadership. It took courage to stand up and say that, and to begin to push an agency towards developing these metrics and standards that we will now begin to talk about as we move through the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategy. So how do we get to this point? You saw the quote from Clyde Christman, Director Christman. He, from that quote, initiated a process where all of our divisions would have at least 2 members of their staff as a part of our global diversity, equity, inclusion team. That made sure that every single division was engaged. He established leadership for the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee. He broke it up into internal and external focus. Internally, our Deputy Director of Administration, Rochelle Calls, was the lead for that. And I was the code lead for our external subcommittee, where we again focused on, externally, how do we look out? How do we present ourselves in the community? Those efforts, you can go to the next slide, Moses. Those efforts resulted in the DCR Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Strategy for 2020 and 2021. We actually were the first state agency to put out a diversity, equity, inclusion plan. I'm very proud to be able to say that, and that we are now being held up as an example for other state agencies. And we're working with our partner natural resource agencies to help them understand, not only how we went about developing our strategic plan, but other ways that we've seen plans develop, and just things that have worked for us, things that haven't worked for us. We established a couple goals as a part of it, and we'll go through these goals, and then we'll start to talk about some of the strategies as well as some of the metrics that we'll use to guide us and judge whether or not we're succeeding at our efforts. So one of our first goals was creating and maintaining a higher performing DCR through the education and incorporation of diversity, equity, and inclusion into the fabric of the organization. We talk a lot about weaving DEI into the fabric of our organization, and that's a critical step, because I'll tell you at the onset, this is a lot of work. And your staff are going to say, you know what, I got too many things on my plate. We've got this going on. I got that going on. I got this coming up. Man, this is just another thing that you're adding onto my plate. Where our goal is really to, again, this becomes just a part of what you do every day and how you do your job. This isn't something extra. This isn't something new. This is just what you do to get your job done. And so, we established a couple guiding principles there, under goal 1 of attracting and retaining a diverse workforce so that it mirrors in the communities and customers the organization serves. And you'll see, these little blue things behind them, attraction and recruitment. And so we broke up into our subcommittees, internal and external, had a couple of different working groups within them. Our internal working group, attraction and recruitment, that one fell squarely with them. Ensuring all DCR personnel have DEI awareness and tools to promote an inclusive and safe environment. That fell to our education and training subcommittee. And then developing benchmarks, measures, and accountability on DEI efforts, facilitate employee engagement, and promote an inclusive work environment. that fell to our retention and inclusion group. So you can see, within our roughly 42 member team of diversity, equity, and inclusion committee within our agency, we even broke down even further from just our internal group and external group, and even within our internal group, breaking out into subgroups that really are able to focus on each of these various aspects. You can go to the next slide. So goal 1 really focused on our internal view. Goal 2 focused on our external view. How do we positively impact Virginian communities and the natural environment of the Commonwealth? Well, we've got a couple ways there. We want to promote equity across all DCR natural resource programs and services to ensure equitable access for all communities. You can see that fell to our equity review committee. Really, we're trying to understand, what are some of the historical inequities that happen within a program? We give away millions of dollars a year. Well, we need to better understand historically who's been able to take advantage of these programs, who is currently and actively, where have we been deploying these funds, and where haven't we deployed these funds? Who hasn't been able to take advantage of it? Are there communities, are there whole segments of the Commonwealth that haven't? That's the what we're trying to begin to unpack there. I will say the equity review piece, we're natural resource people, so we're a bit more on the environmental science side. We've recognized that equity reviews were a bit more on the social science side, and as such, we sought a consultant to do this work and assist us in developing essentially a toolbox that we would be able to use to review programs in various divisions. But really, we call this a toolbox because it's not a one-size-fits-all, as I said earlier. In DCR, we have a very diverse mission, and what happens in our floodplain dam safety division may not be the exact same thing or look the same when we talk about equity and programs as it does in our state parks. And so we're looking to develop that toolbox that we can again use to take a different lens to review each program to again gain that understanding of how can we be more equitable and not only distributing funds, but getting information out to communities. And really, again, how do we invite those individuals in? Enhancing the well-being of Virginia communities and environments through outreach and collaboration with DCR constituents and partners. You'll see the last two there really focused around partnership and pipelines. We really strove to understand for every single division that we have, who are you partnering with? Who's your strongest partners? And then who are the partners that you really want to start working with that are from diverse backgrounds that you haven't engaged with? That exercise really allowed us to understand commonalities between strong partners. And then what are we going to need to do to get some of these new partners that we've identified? How are we going to get them up to a point where where they're one of our strongest partners, where we're seeing them engaging across the board in various divisions, not just in one area of our organization. Inspiring the next generation of future natural resource specialists by introducing them to the field of natural resources through DCR programs, access, and outreach. This is critically important because, again, how do we ensure that we have a diverse workforce in natural resources if we ourselves haven't done the work to make sure that all communities understand the importance of this work, the importance of the environment to them? Many communities see the flooding that's taking place in their community. They know that it's hotter in their communities, but they know it's hot, but they don't necessarily, why is it like that? So being able to not only get in front of diverse populations, being able to meet communities where they are. And our goal really there was, how do we get further upstream? How do we get into the community colleges? How do we ensure that we're connected to the HBCUs? How do we get into the to middle and elementary schools so people see themselves doing this work? and are engaging in these spaces. Many of our communities, they don't even know that some of our spaces that we manage exist. So again, making sure communities know about these opportunities, can see themselves in these opportunities, and can see themselves in these spaces becomes critically important if you're ever really going to change, the population that you're seeing that's using these spaces, or if you're really going to be able to move the needle on having diverse applicants in your pool. Go ahead to the next slide. So as I said, we're going to go kind of through some actions and then some metrics for each of these. So our subcommittees, this will really kind of delve back into those. And our attraction and recruitment subcommittee, I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but I'll read two of them and we'll kind of talk about them. Same thing with our metrics. So some of our action items for our attraction and recruitment subcommittee. We seek to expand opportunities for recruitment to include diverse civic organizations, constituent service organizations, sports clubs, community events, historical, minority, and gender-based colleges and universities, minority fraternities, sorority organizations, professional organizations, natural resource partners. The next one for one of our actions is creating division-specific listings of recruitment outlets where job opportunities should be advertised in order to ensure a more diverse applicant pool. So how are we going to know if we're hitting the mark here? Some of our indicators of success are that the organization's reputation for quality DI efforts enhances its ability to attract and retain employees who contribute to outstanding organizational results. Again, this is a very putting it up front. How is your website presented? Are you ingraining your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in your website? Is it embedded in your mission statement? What about your vision statement for your organization? This is how you communicate that you care about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that your organization stands for it. Recruitment and recruitments include advertising on diversity-focused career websites, using social media and networking with internal and external diversity groups. This one's important. Typically, when you're seeing advertisements, when you're seeing any sort of promotions, for outdoor spaces, they don't typically look like the diversity that we actually see out there in the environment. And so recognizing that and making sure that when you are posting on social media that you're seeking out pictures for presentation, that you really are trying to make sure that you're showing the breadth of the diversity that happens in the spaces that you're managing. You can go ahead to the next slide. Our education and training subcommittee. So some of the actions there. Developing and implementing a comprehensive employee annual training program on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and provide organization-wide learning opportunities. As we kind of talked earlier, what does it take to be seen, heard, and respected? A lot of the commonalities there were around open, honest dialogue, where you're not being judged, but you're being heard. And that's really an important piece there of how do we train for that? How do we train individuals to see their own biases, to see their own vulnerabilities? How do we provide trainings for staff so that they understand what some of the microaggressions that may be happening in their environment, directly or indirectly, and how does that relate back to your work? That's really, really important. And those conversations really allow for a lot of growth within our organization. Developing methods to delivery of learning opportunities across the following areas. So there's a number of areas that we really identified, head on through our education and training subcommittee that we really wanted to focus in on. I'm not going to read all of them again, but I'll talk about two of them. Cycles of prejudice and the upstanding culture trainings. Those were two that we recently did and really got people thinking. What are the cycles of prejudice? How do prejudices happen? How do you break that cycle? Also, upstanding culture again, how do we move you from being a bystander, seeing, and witnessing a microaggression or, something happening, that to an individual, and how do you step in? How do you move from a bystander to an ally, to a person that actively seeks out those microaggressions, those everyday happenings, those paper cuts that happen to many members of our community, and how are you correcting those issues? That's really, what those two kind of get at. But how are we judging success there for education and training? If DEI is integrated into the organization's overall learning education programs, including employee orientation, customer service, and management programs. The employee orientation piece is a critical one, because these things get back to culture, right? Organizational culture. And what better way to indoctrinate somebody in a culture than when they come into the organization? Here's the expectations. This is how you will treat not only individuals you work with, but the community you serve. These are the expectations that we have set as an agency, and we expect you to carry them out. Next, for an indicator, I'll go, that's fine, you're fine, Moses. So the second indicator here would be a variety of innovative DEI tools, including both extensive self-directed and instructor-led learning resources are accessible to all regardless of location. We've really rolled out trainings to everyone and made them available to our entire agency. Fairly diverse agency spread out across the state. And so we've had to come up with creative ways to be able to deliver those programs to make sure that staff had the flexibility and time to be able to come to those trainings. But we also took another important step, and that was really training some of our staff that were part of our DEI committee on how do we facilitate discussion around this? How do we talk about this stuff? How do we get others to join in the conversation? And I'll tell you, those the trainings were great, but the facilitated discussions are really where you really got to dig into the issue to really understand. Well, so is it a microaggression if my cabin only has pictures of Caucasians? Those are the things that came out, right? So again, understanding that diversity, equity, inclusion really start to center around images, start to center around words, both that are communicated or that are just structurally there in your environment. You can go on to the next slide. Our inclusion and retention subcommittee. Some of the first actions are performing surveys, employee and customer, to assess the climate of the agency and employee engagement and analyze results to drive future DEI efforts. Understanding your organization is critically important. If we think about this as like the Maslow hierarchy of needs pyramid, you got to be at that base level and you got to understand where you are in order for you to start moving up the successive layers and really reach that pinnacle of diversity, equity, and inclusion. For us, we provided internal surveys of staff about 3 years ago, as well as we actually just wrapped up a survey to see how our changes were happening. Change doesn't come easy. I will say that, and especially in natural resource agencies where these things have been ingrained and embedded for some time. So changing culture takes some time. And what we're seeing is that we still have about 20 to 25% of our staff that don't really see the value, don't understand why this is important. Are we manufacturing some sort of, a problem that doesn't really exist? So there's, I'm not here to paint that it's all rosy and it's just going to be easy for you. There's legwork that's got to be done. But through understanding, the issues or the individuals who aren't necessarily on board, begin to frame opportunities for your organization to really talk about Well, why is this important? Well, how does this affect your work? Well, what are some positive outcomes that you may see because of this? And so, again, it's not all rosy. It's hard work. But again, understanding the culture within your organization, and also how your organization is perceived externally is really important, because that'll help you as you develop your DEI plans and efforts around where you really need to focus attention, because there's a lot of places you can put attention. So being able to be intentional about where your efforts and your actions are in this work is critically important. You can go back one second. Thank you. And actions, providing monthly communications related to upcoming events, celebrations, items of historical and cultural significance. Again, if you're not steeped in it, you may not know about, some event that happens, in a certain culture. And this is where, we can really be better about ensuring that, cultural competencies, are part of the discussion. Understanding, when a certain religion or a certain community may be celebrating something is an opportunity maybe for your organization or your program to really engage. You're having a celebration about, whatever it may be. Well, hey, we like doing that. Now we get to introduce ourselves to a population that maybe never thought about what we're doing. But how are we really judging success here? Job requirements and descriptions are clear and not confused by non-job related factors such as gender, school graduated from, religion, age, sex, disability, appearance, cultural or specific behaviors. This is an important piece, and really drilling down to what's the core of the job. Because a lot of times, we know that that Johnny, he's got the skills, he can do the work. Man, we've seen him, he's been out there, but that's maybe placing, a couple things on that individual or for the job requirement that's not necessary, for you to be successful. And so by breaking down, looking at all of your jobs, each position, and really understanding, what are the needs, what are the core competencies that are needed within this job, and then really putting those out to allow for a larger pool. Again, I've got that skill set, I can do that, and they apply. So that's, beginning to get us to where, we are opening up and allowing for this more diverse, pool of applicants to engage. The organization ensures that annual compensation gap analysis are conducted to confirm that bias-based or age, disability, gender, organizational function, race, and other potential equity issues are dealt with appropriately. We've all heard of those times when somebody felt like they were passed over. Maybe it was because they were female. Maybe it was because they just didn't fit the body build for whatever the perceived job was. Making sure that we're erasing any of those gaps that may exist, and by studying again core competencies of a position, even starting to look at how raises are doled out, compensation takes place, overall, becomes a part of, again, how are we making sure that we're not only inclusive in how we're hiring, but we're able to retain the best talent. You can go to the next slide. Partnerships and pipelines. So really, this group, again, we were focused on how do we get further upstream. So one of our actions was creating a prioritized list of DCR top partner opportunities by division and prioritizing them based on collaborative opportunity to increase DCR's DEI efforts. New partners are needed to be sought to improve the division's opportunity to attract new populations to DCR or to expand access to DCR programs. We'll also be developing and implementing event opportunities for cross collaboration of DCR with partners and other agencies to create improved equitable access to programs. You can pull up the next slide. So really, how are we as natural resource agencies working with our partner agencies, our sister agencies within the state, to ensure that we're getting in front of the broadest populations possible, that also give us a bang for the buck. because we want to start seeing return on investments. So, how are we going to judge that these are working? The organization partners, there you go, partners with other organizations to work to advance the rights of vulnerable groups in the community. Again, really meeting communities where they are, recognizing that we've partnered with certain schools, with certain communities, we do it all the time, but also really starting to be intentional and putting the effort in to organizations and groups that we haven't really had a conversation with, that we haven't traditionally worked with. Long-range community development plans are formulated with diverse groups, including local government and community leaders. This is an important one because, as we're talking about, climate change, things that are happening, especially along our coast with sea level rise, there's going to be, a need for a lot of conversations, with diverse communities that probably, we as an organization, and I would dare say many nonprofits, haven't engaged with. To understand, well, what are some of the adverse effects that your community is seeing? Here's some of the ways that we can help you. Here's some funding. Here's an expert that can provide some technical expertise to help you guys start really thinking about, what are the opportunities, what are the changes that we need to make as a community. But that's an important one. Really being able to meet communities where they are to help them develop the long-range planning, and just more of the immediate planning of their own needs. Not giving something to somebody or a community or doing it to them, but doing it with them. Go to the next slide. And so finally, our equity reviews. Our equity review subcommittee has really been focused on prioritizing the divisions and programs within divisions to be evaluated based on access and the impact that DCR services provided have on communities and customers outside the agency. So, again, how are we ensuring that we are serving all of Virginia, not just certain populations, not just certain communities? How are we ensuring that all of Virginia has access to these programs? Developing and implementing a comprehensive equity and access review structure and template to be used in an evaluation process. As I mentioned earlier, we brought in a consultant. We're working with Virginia Tech to develop our equity review toolbox. We'll start off with what we're referring to as a sympathetic division within our agency to run a test pilot on. But for equity reviews, we've established another type of committee within our DEI structure. We've established an equity review leadership team, as well as an equity review advisory team, all made up of members of our diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. That are really helping to guide what these tools look like, how these tools are to be implemented, and ultimately be trained on how to implement the tool. As a natural resource agency, we're very big on learning the fish instead of just being given the fish. And I spoke to that with training staff to be facilitators in these discussions. But this is another part of that. This is going to be an ongoing effort. This isn't a one and done. It took us 400 plus years to get here where we are today. And it's going to take us a while to get out of it. And in order to do that, again, these are going to need to be repetitive opportunities and initiatives. Again, it's not just going to be something that you do today and we're all done. You can go ahead and move to the next one because I'll talk about I really want to get to this part because this is the really exciting part, quite honestly. I wanted to uplift some of the things that have been happening, that have come out of this work over the last year. Education. So we've implemented agency-wide monthly DEI awareness emails that have been shared, as well as continue to share highlights and topics such as bias, blind spots, systematic racism, microaggressions, privilege, and much more. These education opportunities, I think, have been really eye-opening for a lot of individuals within our organization. It's allowed us really to unpack, our own biases. We all have them, and if you say you don't, you're lying to yourself. We all have biases. We all have blind spots. We're all a product of how we grew up, the communities that we grew up in. And so again, having open, honest discussions around those blind spots, those biases, are how we grow as individuals. Trainings. We've hosted a number of trainings, as I said, cycle of prejudice awareness trainings. We've done that, 8 statewide webinars. We created an upstanding culture training for our DCR staff. Again, we hosted 8 of those, and we did 30 facilitated follow-up discussion sessions. Really, again, allowing people to unpack what they heard, how they're feeling, maybe, a lot of the things that they've seen, happen within the agency or, in their own lives. I will say, between these 2 pieces have been some of the greatest strides that we've seen over this last year on changing the internal culture of the organization. We've moved from where people maybe felt like they couldn't bring their whole selves to work, to a place where people feel comfortable saying, hey, the language that we used on that email or that survey, we didn't touch the mark there. One of the greatest examples that we have a benevolent society that is, for our state park employees. The picture for the benevolent society was a beautifully colored in, drawn earth, trees around it with 2 hands. The 2 hands happen to be white. Well, staff were the first to call this out. Hey, I feel like, maybe we should change, this logo to be more representative of our agency. Can we remove the hands? Can we have, a couple hands that are different colors? But that, I think, speaks volumes about the agency and where we are right now in our internal culture. People now feel comfortable saying that, hey, that doesn't sit well with me. That doesn't seem right. And they're being heard. And their issues being acted on. So change is happening actively. We're crowdsourcing these changes at this point because, again, the agency, individuals within the agency feel comfortable speaking up, both to their leadership, to their managers, to their coworkers about, hey, nah, that joke ain't cool. That's not what we're doing here. Go ahead to the next slide. The first one, is really internal. This is an external that I'm really, really excited about. We've, through our soil water conservation districts, we've recognized that, since the mid 1900s, many farmers of color have been pushed off of their land through racist policies, and also racial terror in many cases. But we also recognize that these are the same communities of farmers that over the years haven't been getting access to certain programs, both from the federal level as well as from the state level. Recognizing that, the director of soil water conservation, Mr. Darrell Glover, worked with Director Chrisman and said, what, hey, what if we ran this pilot and we got $50,000 in the governor's budget, and we can start this program and work with Virginia State University Small Farmer Outreach Program, and really start to develop a program that's tailored just for this community, that puts money in their pockets for some of the cost share programs, for some of the initiatives to help deal with the runoff and the like, and fencing of streams. So how can we be more pointed? Well, we took this idea to the secretary, Secretary Strickler, who not only loved the idea, was like, well, $50,000, we need more money than that. And so we ended up with $250,000 for a pilot project to initiate a small farmer outreach program in conjunction with Virginia State University. It's a local HBCU state school that is a polytechnical school. They do the same things Virginia Tech does. They just happen to be a HBCU. And so by working directly with the small farmer outreach program at Virginia State University, we really hope that over these next 2 years, we're going to be able to not only stand up this program, but really be able to show the real impact that this program is able to have. You know, when you're intentional, when you're pointed, when you recognize the issues and address the issues at hand. Go to the next slide. And lastly, I'll leave you with something that's become kind of a motto, if you will, for our agency. We need to listen. We need to listen to each other. We've got 2 ears, we got 1 mouth. We need to be using our ears a whole lot more and our mouths a whole lot less. We need to be listening to each other, to your lived experience, to the things that have happened to you in your life, to some of the things that really bother you. We need to learn. We need to learn from each other. We need to learn from the experiences that we're seeing happening out there in the news daily. We need to learn about our own biases. We need to learn about our organizational biases. But we need to act. Doing nothing is not an option. This time demands that we, as natural resource managers and professionals, really step up to the plate here. I'm gonna tell you, 2045 is right around the corner. 2045 is the time when America is expected to be a majority minority country. Well, if we as natural resource managers and professionals have not done the work to ensure that all populations are engaged in the outdoors, engaged in regenerative environmental practices, we're going to lose. We're never going to reach the goal of environmental sustainability, and we're going to be probably extinct. So it's critically important that we engage everybody in this work. And action, again, starts at many different spots, but inaction is not, it really is not an option for us at this point. But this work is going to take repeated action, repeated listening, repeated learning. This isn't a one and done. Again, it took us 400 plus years to get here. So this is going to take repeated action to really move the needle. Understanding, what worked, what didn't work, what a different organization did to achieve a specific result, and ingraining that in the work that you're doing. Listening again, learning, and acting. These are things that will be required of us to truly meet the needs of today. I could keep going, but that's the end of my slides.
Let's give a couple questions and open up a couple moments for questions. Any reactions out there? Feel free to throw it in the chat. We'll give a couple seconds for you to think about it. If you have a question for Nathan, this is a great time to ask.
Nathan, this is Liz Belcher in Roanoke. I'm wondering, you talked some about recruitment and, improving our targets and stuff. And I'm thinking about it in terms of the demographic picture statewide, but also the demographic picture locally. So while we might have a goal of mirroring the statewide demographics, sometimes on the local level, that's really tough to do because there's not many people who meet the demographics. So, I happen to live in a county where the minorities are 4%. I hear really very, very often recently from managers, it's not that we can't hire a good person, we can't hire anybody because nobody applied. So I wondered how the the goals and guidelines and expectations are playing out across the state.
That's a really, really good point, Liz. urban environments tend to have, a much wider array of diversity, but rural environments still have diversity. What Liz is speaking to is, there's a stark difference depending on what side of 95 you happen to live, or even what side of the Blue Ridge you happen to live on. What I would say though, Liz, is that we're seeing some of those same issues. There's a lot of open jobs out there, and so making sure that you're getting not only qualified applicants, but how are you getting diverse applicants? One of the ways that we've really started to crack that nut has been really focusing on going to HBCUs, going to specifically to career fairs for affinity groups. And I will also say that, while, a lot of places, a lot of rural environments may not necessarily have a lot of traditional diversity, as we would call it, white, Black, Native American, they do have, Hispanic populations. They do have, other ways to measure diversity, because socioeconomic diversity is just as important as diversity of ethnicity. And so I guess my question back to you, Liz, would be, if 4% of your population is, of a diverse background, does your workforce represent that? And
I
if
would
not, how do
say
you?
probably not.
That's what we see in our organization. We don't reflect the Commonwealth, but we seek to. And through many internships, we're starting to see, where there is this effort that we're doing, that we're putting forth, is starting to pay dividends. We've had 2 different diversity interns that have come in, since we started this work. That have, again, these coming from schools that we traditionally hadn't worked with, and have really allowed us to unlock some different avenues of connecting with communities. One in particular, we've been trying to find out information about a specific area. It's called Group Camp 7 at Pocahontas State Park for a number of years. It wasn't until we brought on this diversity intern who, again, looked like the population that had been working and using this area, who was able to make connections, with the churches that were working, in these camps and in Camp 7. Camp 7 was a place that was reserved for African Americans during that time, and but we haven't been able to really uncover the stories there until, again, we were able to find someone from a diverse background that felt comfortable when it comes down to it, going, and meeting with church groups and talking to them about the work that they were doing there, and uncovering some of their historic documents. But it takes the legwork. It takes you as an individual, as an organization, going and meeting those communities where they are. It's not, it's a difference. I liken it to either, you can be invited to the dance, and that's great, but it's something else to be asked to dance, right? And so, when we talk about, hey, all of our spaces are open and available to everybody, anybody can come, that's everybody's, everybody's welcome, right? But what did you do to actively reach out to those communities that haven't been using these spaces to say, you know what, I'm not just inviting you to the dance. I would like to dance with you. I'd like to take you for a hike. I'd like to take you out paddling so that, you gain an appreciation for this. I'd like to, man, there's this wildflower over there you gotta see. That's the work, and that's how you start to see that change in both the populations that, are engaging in the spaces, but also in, the populations that are, coming to your organization to be a part of it.
And I'll just add that, Nathan, you already said this. I want to highlight this again, is that sometimes that diversity that we're trying to highlight isn't always our ethnicity. it's about having the eyes to begin to, or eyes and the mind to ask the question and recognize, you know, how is my team or the group that I'm interacting with, or my organization, representative of those we're serving, those around us. And so that may be in age, that may be in our ableness, that may be in a number of different things that influence who we are in our backgrounds. Now, you know, and then are we also recognizing, sometimes we say, well, realistically, the jobs that we have invite certain kinds of people for just normal, you know, whatever reason it may be. And that's not to make a judgment on whether that's good or bad, but for each organization to begin to ask for, you know, this is my personal opinion, that we begin to recognize these biases in the system, or our personal biases also, which are acceptable. Some of them may be that, you know, for certain kind of jobs, of course, you're going to get younger people or older people, and that may be tied to physique, that may be tied to you know, just experience and the required level of experience for a certain job. And we should be able to interpret moment by moment, instead of just going off of a checklist to say, well, I just need to hire, you know, X non-white people to my staff. I need to hire X women on my staff. I need to hire such and such. So yeah, there's always work to be done in terms of making an environment inclusive and diverse. It's not always going to be on the normal way of looking at demographics. I think personally, and this, you know, closing out here for this part of the session, is that it's also, you have these indicators to know when you're accomplishing this. And for me personally, a big indicator of when you do have a diverse group is you do see disagreement. You do see a little bit of conflict, not hostile conflict all the time, but there is different opinions being spoken, and that there's boldness for that to happen. And I think that's a great sign. And I think I'll just leave it at that for now, but we're headed off into a break. So we'll give you another 5 minutes here. I'm at the top of hour, 3 o'clock Eastern. If we come back at 3:05, we'll come into our last hour here, and hopefully be sharing a couple more concrete tools that will leave you with actions to take up today.
I'll just plug, please do come back, because this part will kind of put into practice what we've heard about since the top of the session. So I think the last part will be what you can take back to your group with.
I'd also add that I put everyone's email addresses, Moses's, Risa's, and Nathan's into the chat bar. So if y'all are unable to stay or have otherwise questions for afterwards, feel free to reach everybody at those contacts.
See you in 5 minutes.
Thanks. Good job, Nathan.
Thanks.
My home state's Virginia. I grew up in Northern Virginia, and I was not aware of many of those programs. I've been gone for about 11, 12 years, but it's pretty cool to see what all is happening there.
You know, we've heard a little bit about, or like Moses and I have heard a little bit about it through the year, because we've been working with Nathan to work on this workshop for a year and a half. But I didn't realize until we heard about it on the news, this One Virginia plan, and then looking at it, didn't realize how, you know, like how big it was, I guess, and you know how thorough it was, and that it really is the first one in the whole country. So, and since we've been stating that the last few weeks, Nathan, I haven't heard anyone say, "Oh no, there's one in, you know, Colorado," or.
Yeah, I haven't seen another one that's at least, you know, at the state level. That's, you know, and now I didn't say this, but you know, we're now mandated by state law to develop DEI plans. Each agency is. House Bill 1993, which just passed, actually mandates that every single agency will develop a diversity, equity, inclusion plan.
So that's every agency in the state of Virginia.
Every state agency, whether you're state agency or whether you're a state college, you have to have a diversity, equity, inclusion plan that's updated annually.
How many agencies?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that. Maybe one of my colleagues is someone that can answer that.
Yeah, because I don't like, some agencies might be huge, and some might, I mean, like Department of Transportation, that suddenly seems huge.
VDOT's
right?
huge, I mean, wow. I don't envy some of the programs I have to develop, these plans. Ours took about a year to develop. And so, it's definitely not something you can just, plug and play, if you will. To really do it, it takes, some fairly intense discussion, quite honestly, to really, start to develop, well, what are our action items, and, how are we going to develop this list of, diverse, communities that we should, try to focus in on.
If aside from how many, what percentage do you think like haven't started it? So would have to.
Most have not. Most agencies haven't started a DEI plan. Probably ourselves, DCR and DEQ, Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. They've started this work, but they haven't started a plan. They had a consultant that came in and really took a temperature check of how the organization is presenting itself externally, what the community really needed from DEQ to really start to focus in on, especially environmental justice. But they still haven't developed a DEI plan. So yeah, we're fielding a lot of phone calls from agency heads and HR divisions on how do we come up with this plan, how do we develop it. I'll say another thing that that I think really helped our plan was we took the approach of it being a bit more diffused. It wasn't one individual that was responsible for this plan. It's not one individual that's responsible for implementing this plan. It is everybody's responsibility to implement this plan. And so, you see that in the way that the leadership was developed. There's two co-leads, that are, at the deputy director level. So the expectation from, the highest levels is there. But, you also see that, this starts to filter down into each of the divisions. I mean, most of our divisions at this point have created, their own DEI committee within their division. So further, where the rubber meets the road, really, begin the implementation process of this work.
Right. Oh boy. I could see where some, I'm just kind of making this up. I could see where some agency folks would have maybe heard about what you're doing, but hadn't paid attention. So, or if they were surprised at the mandate, kind of caught flat-footed. Hopefully they were listening, because if they were, they'd be like, like what, it wouldn't be the, oh shit, it would be that, okay, I guess it's time. I guess we do have to do that. But I could see where some folks were maybe surprised, or that it was abrupt, or that it was a mandate, as opposed to we suggest that it's okay. It's all good. It'll all be good at the end.
All right, we're coming up at 3:06. So we'll just get started right back up here. Take a moment to recompose, come back from the break. We're going to just get into our last section right here. And Risa, I think you're up first. Let me get the slides going.
Okay. So what we're going to go into is just a kind of a continuation of what we've been talking about since we started. And I think what's important to remember, if you're kind of a very organized and a box checker and you do a to-do list and you're happy when your to-do list is finished, this is not that. You know, the process that we are talking about is, you know, like a doctor's practice. You never fix everybody in your practice, you practice. You know, so the work and our responsibility involves ourselves, you know, taking a look at what we are and what we do in our perspectives and our organizations, whether that's, you know, you might define it as your work team, depending on your job. You might view it as your leadership team. And then those who you work with outside, you know, outside yourself, which could be your work team, and outside the organization. So the communities that you live in, the agency maybe that you work with, or your fellow Department of Interior agencies, or your fellow Virginia agencies, and your partners, which might be the Friends of the Appomattox, Lower Appomattox River. But I think what's important is that we're never done. And even in 2045, whether we pass or fail, we won't be done. We will continue to work on this. So I think, like, for me, I'm a box checker. So that's kind of frustrating to think that we'll never be done, but that's the way it is. You know, you can't undo, as Nathan said, 400 years, certainly in a day or not in a week, and not between now and 2045. So I think that's just sort of a different framework that will be the most helpful, because if we don't take that framework to heart, we'll be kind of frustrated. But that's the reality of the situation, I think. So next slide. So here's a list of pretty cool questions. One that's not bolded, that's not on purpose. And so there are 3 columns of questions that we can ask about how to move forward with just ourselves. What are my biases? We could spend the next couple of hours talking about that. How does my background enable or hinder my success? Am I aware of my privileges? We all have them, even for feeling like we don't, we do. Just the fact that we're on this call, we are all extremely privileged. And language, what kinds of terms and words am I using? And these seem like questions that they're kind of basic, and they're kind of really difficult if we want to get down to the bottom of why you are the way you are. It has something to do with what you were doing when you were 4 years old. So that's difficult, but it's, you know, that's what we want to begin to look at. In our organizations, you can read these. How reducing reliance on culturally focused, organized to access diverse candidates. These organizations are helping us now, but, you know, our goal could be not having to rely on historically Black colleges in order to find Black people to come and have them work here. They should be, you know, accessible as, you know, as others are now. Promotion, how does diversity change as you move up the chain of command? We could probably guess that without looking at statistics. And some of these others are awesome examples that were pointed out by Nathan in the One Virginia plan. How are people evaluated, and how do biases affect them? How could you start a conversation with your peers about the many aspects of being an employee or a person in your community? And then funding, what are seed projects and new initiatives? I have to tell you one story that I think, can't remember if it was Nathan or someone else was telling me about it. Nathan, it was one of the stories you told about looking at the grant programs in the state of Virginia. When they looked at, tell me if I'm saying this wrong, but when they looked at the grantees of past projects, they noticed that they didn't see grant projects funded that were in maybe communities of colors or underserved communities. Well, it was because those people may not have known about the grant opportunities, or they might not have been in a position to be able to, you know, apply for them. They'd never applied for a grant before. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling process. So it's up to us to think about how we reach out differently to those people that we are saying that we want to reach out to. And then that kind of goes into the communities. Do we understand the diversity of those using our rivers? Do we encourage volunteerism among them? What kind of partnerships do we have? Do we invite folks of diverse interests to diverse backgrounds to our boards and friends groups? And are we promoting technical and academic and those types of areas of skill and expertise among different types of groups? So with those, let's go to kind of a traditional list of goal setting, and we're now going to start our homage to the One Virginia Plan, which really is innovative, unique, very thoughtful, and the first of its nature, of its type in the country. So these are goal setting elements that you're familiar with. We probably all have had a checklist, something like this in our lives. So that's not new, but the framework is helpful. What is new, we can go to the next slide, in the One Virginia Plan is a worksheet. It's the metrics dashboard, and we've set links to this. It's on the website, where you identify goals with actions, resources required, who's leading, your deliverable. And then this, I think, is one of the coolest parts, is that you identify the impact, which can be low, high, medium, or low. You identify the time frame, which could be short, medium, long term. And then you make note your progress. So you can have a project on here that you haven't begun. You don't have to do anything next week. And you don't necessarily, you choose time frames, impact, and your progress as you set for yourselves. So this is, it's very much an open and an open system where you take responsibility for, or you and your work group take responsibility for deliverables as you define them. And, this might sound like you're making your New Year's resolution, but if you're doing it as a group, hopefully you can keep each other accountable for it. So the system that the One Virginia metrics dashboard sets up, we thought was really excellent. And it goes through the goals as Nathan went through their state goals. But we'd like to take that framework and apply it to what we have been talking about ourselves today, with addressing assessments and our own work for ourselves as individuals, in our organizations, and with our communities and with our partners. So I'll toss it back to you, Moses.
And with that, we've adapted the same dashboard and for measuring progress from the One Virginia Plan into something for us here today. We recognize that the change happens not only at an individual level, not only as an organization, and not only in our partnership community, but that it happens at the center of these three different levels or areas. We're going to add I think we have the file to share. It's a fillable PDF of the same exact form that you're going to see. And I think Jack's working on getting that up there for you. But this tool is supposed to help us bounce from these questions and not leave them to be just rhetorical ones. Can we utilize the list of these questions here for ourselves, in our organizations, and in our communities to identify what are the concrete actions that I want to be taking on, with no judgment to the impact, no judgment to the time frame that we're expecting these to happen, and no judgment to the progress that we're at. This work is never ending, but the actions themselves that we take might. So how can we keep track of that and measure where we are and where we're going? One of the tips I'll say before we kind of go through an example is that when we look at impact, time frame, and progress particularly, I don't think it's sometimes it might be difficult to think, well, what do I consider as high impact? What do I consider as low impact? I think for the purposes of doing this worksheet today, you decide whether you want it to be, you believe that a particular action has a high impact, medium impact, or low impact, whether you think short-term means 1 week or 1 day, whether you think long-term means a year or 5 years, you decide what that means. And same thing with progress. You decide what it means to have something in progress. Do you count the fact that you did a Google search to find a new class in progress? That's fine with us today. And there you go. You have it in the chat. You can download that. Looking at this, we'll just kind of try an example. Let me see if I can, oops, sorry about that. I'm going to bring up my screen and we'll do this together. This will be the same document that you have it here in the chat. You can download it for yourself. And part of today's session and workshop, we're hoping that you can leave with at least one action identified for yourself, for your organizations, and for your partnerships and community. So, and we have time set aside to do this, but let's give an example. Okay. So at the top, we're hoping that you just put in your name and go line by line with no rush, thinking of an action that I might take as an individual. And how do I identify these actions? Well, we have these list of questions, right?
What if we look at those questions? Oops, sorry.
Yeah, let's look at those questions again.
If we look at the questions and have everyone just take a couple of minutes and try to come up with their own individual, organization, and community, and then come back. They don't have to go out into breakout groups because we're sort of, the group is small, but just so that we're not listening to me or you prescribe actions.
Sure.
So is everyone able to get to the form and maybe jot stuff down, or you can do it on a piece of paper too, if you'd like.
Yeah, feel free to pull out a piece of paper and do that also. How about we do this? We'll give about 2 or 3 minutes to let's try to just do one. Thanks for the thumbs up, Karita. I'll share my screen and I'll try to fill out a couple myself, and maybe we can just kind of silently do it together for about 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, me too.
take about another minute to try and fill out one more line, asking a question on each of these levels between yourself, your organization, and your communities. And try to fill out one line. The action, describe the resources that you might need. What do you hope to be the result, the outcome? Is this a high impact, medium, low impact action item? Will it take a long time? Where are you at with progress on this action? All right. Let me pull up one here. I'm going to share a couple that, that I just came up with now, and then I'd really like to open it up to everybody here and have a chance to publicly share any items or actions that you've identified for yourself, that you would do as yourself, as an organization, or with your communities. I think it's good for accountability. It's good for sparking ideas about what you might do when you hear somebody else come up with something. So take some time to think about it some more. I'm going to share my screen with what I've shared, or what I've just come up with right now, and let's have an open discussion. Feel free to ask questions as we go. I'm going to pull mine up. Where did you go? There it is. All right, I'm going to try to make this big so you all can see. So I came up with two. I live in Pittsburgh, so one action that I thought I could take as an individual was to do some research on zoning policy or the history of how neighborhoods have developed in Pittsburgh. I think I'll need some library time. Maybe I can contact some city offices, and I'll hope to make full use of the resources of the internet. The outcome or anticipated result I want is that I can understand the context that I'm serving, the neighborhoods that I'm working in, that I have a good basis to make informed observations and educated guesses about how a history or how a community has formed? Do I know the public history of that place so that I understand more about it? Specifically, I'm thinking, and maybe I'll write this also, I'm thinking about researching the HOLC maps from the 30s and 40s that was dictating redlining policy and home ownership in cities larger than 44,000. This is something that I think has a medium impact and maybe might take a short term. I'm defining that for a couple of months, and I haven't started this yet, so I'm gonna hopefully move this down the track. As an organization, I think I want to ask our project partners about their perceptions about our agency. I think it'll take, resource-wise, my project partners' time. And I hope that the outcome is that we understand better and with more detail how these communities, whether they be rural or urban, white or Hispanic, what is the perception that different groups have of our agency, and are we acting appropriately with that information? So I think it's just gathering information. I think this also has a medium impact. Maybe this is ongoing and long term. And yeah, I think I've already started with some of my project partners to listen and to ask the question first off. So I want to pass it around for folks to share maybe just one, walk us through their lines. But before I do that, I want to open it up if there's questions about how I might have done this, or questions about what might be a good action.
Or even questions about the framework.
Yeah.
And about the dashboard in general.
Okay.
Let's hear from others.
Hey, this is Chris. I'll start. I need to jump off in a few minutes for another meeting, so I apologize. But I kind of looked at it honestly on maybe a combination of individual and organizational, just for the one line that I did, and I thought about it in the context of hiring. As my organization looks to bring on new staff, I'd like to look at ways to access more diverse candidates. So that would be my action. And the resources needed are really sources of information. As we recruit as an organization, as I recruit as an individual, I tend to go back to what I'm familiar with, looking at the same schools, looking at the same candidate pools. And I probably don't know what the resources are out there to assist me in attracting more diverse candidates. So I'd love some information or some help about that. And in terms of results, I think we'd be, looking to develop a more diverse and higher performing team, that this would be a high impact. It's probably something I could do and my organization could do in the short term. And I hesitated between not yet begun and ongoing, because we've talked about this and are trying to do some of this, but I think a little bit more focus is warranted. So early stages at best, I'd say.
But that you're thinking about it now, Chris, before actually you don't have a job that you're searching for now. So it's great to be thinking about now, because by the time you get to where you actually have to fly a job, you'll be farther down the road.
Let's hope so.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic.
How about you, Karita?
I just threw in the Avarna's hiring toolkit. We've used it and found it useful. Not at the federal level, because we have a lot of limitations, I'd say, but with our fellows hiring.
How about your action, though? Yeah.
My action, I threw one of them. I think I was looking for some fun actions, and I'm going to read the Joy Trip project is doing a book club, and it's all year long, but April's book is I'm a Birder, and it's someone I've been interested in reading about and his story and history. So I'm going to commit to reading a book.
About you, Lilia?
Unmute. All right, so this may, well, we'll see. I actually said to recognize my privilege, but don't let that from hindering me from speaking up. Thank you, Nathan, for shaking your head. Because it sort of feels weird, because I can definitely get into spaces where I'm like, ooh, I'm so privileged and I don't want to put my foot in my mouth or call out, you know. So it seems like the resources needing is really just recognition of myself. I don't know that there's, I mean, sure, I could read books and stuff, but it's, and practice. What the anticipated result would be that it would allow me to leverage my privilege to help others potentially. And I think that has immediate impact. It's certainly long-term and ongoing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. In a group where someone had a similar question and the group that was meeting decided to pick a buddy. You know, somebody that you know. So if you said, oh, I said something, was that weird what I said in my meeting today? They could say yes. Or, you know what I mean? Just, it's sort of mentorship, but more of like a buddy system.
Yeah.
Everybody's sort of learning. Yeah.
And right. I love that you are kind of stretching the bounds of what the tool is, right? Like make it work for you. So if it's something that's constructive and helps you identify an action, and then ask those questions about, well, what does this action achieve? Let's do things that make sense, and let's create some sort of narrative or understand the different questions that make this a smart goal, a smart action. Is it specific? Is it measurable? Achievable? Is it relevant? Sometimes we come up with actions like, oh, I totally lost the spirit of why I'm doing this. And then to be realistic about the time. That's good. Jack, Liz, Greg, feel free to step in here and share if you have one.
I can share quickly. I've got two that I thought of, one on the organizational side and one on the personal side. Well, the personal side, I guess, is kind of a two-part. One, I read a lot, and I've been reading, when Karita shared the list of books for the Joy Project, I saw that the Black Faces, White Spaces book was in there, and I've been reading through that. It talks a lot about like history of public lands and wilderness and green spaces and the overlap between how communities of color have been marginalized from those spaces and separated in different ways. And there's a lot of sub-stories in there that she references, and there's good documentation in her sources section, stuff like that. And a lot of them are really interesting. I've been trying to go through and bookmark those sub-stories to look back at afterwards, because a lot of them are really interesting and horrifying and different levels of engaging. And so I don't want to distract myself from the nature of the book while I'm reading it to stay focused, but to go back and research those stories and endeavors however I can is a big personal one, because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in there that has a lot of depth to it. And especially in the geography that I live in Western North Carolina, you know, we're a very public land heavy region of the country. And that's why a lot of people like it here, because there's a tremendous amount of national forest land and national park land and places to play outside. And, you know, myself, like, of course, love it for that. But we also have a pretty strong, in some ways marginalized, but a small and distinct community of color in this region outside of Asheville and Old Fort and Transylvania County, et cetera. And so there's a lot of stories around those areas that I'd like to look into a bit more and learn more about, just for sake of knowledge. And, you know, friends will visit all the time, and we'll go mountain biking or paddling and across these really special places. And we're always talking about the natural history and the ecology and the biology of the areas. We don't usually talk about the historical backgrounds, maybe the negative side of things. So I'd like to just do some story digging into that. On the organizational side, like I said earlier, I used to work for RMS and I'm still involved for sure, but I do a lot of consulting mapping projects now for just a variety of groups. And I think we do this to some degree, but a lot of times we'll be making just a trail guide or a map for a particular geography. And rarely in the past do we or other people mention, you know, the history of the landscape that we're looking at. You know, a lot of people now, and I think into the past, and, you know, it's becoming more common now to see stamps on messages or in email signatures notifying, you know, where this town is in the context of Native American or indigenous communities, in terms of here it's the Cherokee people for the most part, but I'd like to just incorporate that more into the work we work on. It depends on the type of project it is and, how much real estate we have to develop to that. But it's always easy enough to put a little asterisk and a bookmark or even something more lengthy just to denote, whose homeland this place is and what the history is of it, etc. So two things that, I think are both interesting to me, and I think also can be, sobering in a positive way too.
I think that's great. And I think you have, but I just want to make sure, do you have those impact and progress and the time span marked on that, just to keep yourself on track?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I did write this. I'm kind of looking at the screen with y'all right now, but I've got it into the PDF document. A lot of the timelines are based on the project timelines of these endeavors, and the one where I do need to keep myself accountable is the bookmarking of things and other stories. I'm definitely guilty of bookmarking, literally or figuratively, tons of things to follow up on, and of course we're all busy, and it's I'd rather bookmark and follow up on 5 awesome things than note 100 of them and never see any of them. So I think a tangible part of that is just being really deliberate about ensuring I go back to the stories and topics that are most interesting versus just trying to track all of them.
Thanks, Jack. That's awesome. Don't worry about bookmarking. Some things are always in I have 6 books that I've started and I haven't finished. It's been at least 1 or 2 years for some of them.
Well, it's so hard too now with, obviously with the internet and the computer, it's so easy just to be oh, that looks cool. I'm just going to bookmark that, on your computer or browser. And which is great to have that. Then all of a sudden you've got hundreds and you're like, where do I even start? Overwhelming.
Greg, we see you. Welcome. What do you want to share with us?
I've been here the whole time, but since I was running around, didn't want to distract everybody with video. So what I'm thinking actually covers individual, organization, and partnerships and community. The action I'd like to be able to partake and improve is increasing diversity both in my staff and volunteers in terms of introducing and helping on water sports classes, kayaking. The struggle is where to find, the people who can do that. And I think the anticipated result really is going to be newcomers of a diverse background. Are they going to trust a 55-plus-year-old white guy, or are they going to be better reached by somebody, of a more diverse background? And finding, getting that has been a struggle. Been a struggle, and that's any thoughts on that, on where to find that, because again, there's some big cultural divides. Trying to bring that in, especially in terms of if you can turn a kid into a water rat, loving it, you're going to have this generational growth down the road. And Nathan spoke of that earlier. We need that. You get them playing for an hour, you can make that magic happen. But to break that barrier, that first hour, can a youth of color trust somebody like me, versus it'd be better trusting somebody of a more diverse background potentially. So finding where can we start getting the people to help on that. I'll leave everybody with that question.
Well, I'll come help you, Greg, for rolling classes. If I can, you guys do a lot of work with, James River Park, who's introducing, younger populations, diverse populations into the sport. VCU Outdoor Adventure Program. Those are grand opportunities. But you're right. It's going to start with cultivating the younger individuals to love this, and see it as a viable outlet for recreation, as well as a job, right? I mean, because that's a challenge, because a lot of communities, I mean, you're pushed to be an engineer, you're pushed to be a doctor, that's success. But success isn't necessarily measured in, how much you make, and we need to make sure people understand that, success can be, building up your community, can be giving back to the environment and protecting, the space that you care about. But cultivating, those younger users, where they know that, these are opportunities for you. You can make money doing this. You have a great career doing this. Because I think a lot of people don't necessarily hear that message either. Again, they look at the dollar signs and not necessarily, the quality of life and the giving back opportunities.
And in terms of asking and answering your question of whether you could be that person, I think it's absolutely yes, absolutely yes. And even for myself, I think about people who have been that person who got me that spark of whether it's the outdoors or not. Some of it is going to be my parents. Some of it are my teachers. Some of it have to do with just happening across like our local recreation programs that got me hooked. And they weren't all people of color. I promise you that. But they were introducing me and instilling that love of, whatever the sport or whatever the activity. Now, I think what it was, and it's a great question you asked because it made me think straight back to those times, and I thought about who they were to me, and I know it sounds a little scripted, but they made me feel seen, heard, and respected. They made me realize that in order to do the same activities, I don't have to do it their way, but I could do it my way. Of course, with all things attributed to making sure that I'm safe, that we're doing things legally, et cetera, but it doesn't have to look any particular way, and that that there's room for these activities for me to be expressive of myself. And I think creating that environment was so key.
So 2 examples of what something that I experienced this past weekend, the Anacostia Watershed Society, folks who are going to do the keynotes on Wednesday. They have an annual festival, which was partly virtual this year because of how we know, but they had signups to do paddling, go visit the river. Just go visit the river and you can try canoeing. And the people who showed up were from the neighborhood, so not traditional paddler people. And my canoe club went to teach. So families, mom brought her kids who were, middle school kids, not middle school, they're too cool. The grade school kids came with them, and a few like brother and sister or roommates came out. And what was really interesting is I was the last person chosen to be a teacher, partly because I don't, I'm not that we talked about this earlier. The people who were chosen first to be, I'll pick that person as my teacher, was like the 6-foot guy, probably someone who looked kind of like you. He looks like he knows what he's doing. I'm going to pick him. And so create a party on the water. And then so it's not really the canoeing lesson that you're using as an attraction, but the party. And this is something you can do while you're there. So that's one example. And then the other one is with RMS, we're going to try to do this year is Hispanic Access Foundation annually creates this whole group of Latino Conservation Week events. And they've hundreds of them all over the place. And when they get set, we've asked them to tell us about those that are on water. So we're going to ask our members to literally just attend, nothing else, just attend and introduce themselves and invite who might be interested to their office to come check out whatever they do. They might be a kayak retailer or they might be an outfitter, just to go where people are and to invite people to come visit them, where they will tell them about what they do. And if they're the retailer, they might offer to, do a lesson or something like that. So one is invite people kind of not to trick them, but to under the auspices of something that's familiar, which is a party, a day, a family outing. And the other one is to go into the space of a non-traditional group and then just check it out. And then like we heard yesterday what people are interested in, this event that I attend. why they were there but afraid to go in the canoe, why they were there but they had to because they did it because their roommate dared them. You know, you hear all that, but until you experience that, it's hard to know really what to do until you, it's sort of like growing empathy. Go experience something by kind of growing this empathy, and then you can, oh, I'll do this. Oh, I won't do that, but I'll do this kind of thing. I'll
Right,
quit
yeah.
because
Risa.
Good ideas, yeah. And that's, we've been fortunate to have a lot of school groups come out over the past 20 or so years. So we are getting a good mix. And I've been able to tie in a previous job where I worked for at-risk youth. It was a positive peer culture modality. If you get, some of the peers in the water playing around, and I don't even want to bother with rolling sessions. I want to bother just go out there in a kayak, flip it upside down, climb on top of the upside down kayak with two of your friends and see you can stand up the longest. Just get goofy out there. And then you can get this positive peer culture going. But getting more people of color in the staff side of things, I think would be great, and then that would just grow and blossom in and of itself. So yeah, really, try to make that happen, and hopefully some of the kids that we've interacted with already over the years are going that direction. Find there is going to be a career, and it's not going to be all about money.
Great. Thank you.
just add one more thing, and that is that creating ongoing access. So kids that go and have that fabulous experience, what if they want to go again? You say, well, you can come back next year in April, or if they were able to go to a weekly session or a monthly session or another one nearby, so that access to the activity, I think, for those who
that is huge. That is huge. Fortunately, we can offer it. They can bring their families back.
right.
It's very, very inexpensive, but there is a little bit of a cost just to cover our costs, which is the way our programs are set up. But that is there to try to get the families back, and it's happened on occasion, that's way cool when that happens. It really, really is.
Yeah, you're doing it. Just do it some more.
And over time, the value to the individual and the value to the group grows, and those barriers. People find ways, and we just do our best to make sure that there's less barriers in the way. So, we have a few minutes, but I also want to, Liz, I know you're also here. I thought I'd create some space for you to share your own lines of actions or reflections if you have them. Feel free to.
So I am the regional Greenway coordinator, and I often, particularly if I have to give a PowerPoint, I say the Greenway is the most metropolitan space we have in Roanoke. Roanoke at one point was on the list of the most segregated communities in the state. I think it was the most segregated. And Roanoke County, the donut around it, is probably one of the least diverse communities in the state. So anyway, I use this all the time. I say, go on the Greenway, you'll see people of color, you see people speaking different languages, you'll see Buddha services on Sunday morning, you'll see the Jewish people throwing bread off the bridges. I mean, you see a lot of different cultures on the Greenway, and a lot of cultures using the Greenway for religious purposes as well as just for recreation. But then I think about my board. I have two boards. I have the Greenway Commission. It's appointed by the localities. At this time, I have only white people on the Greenway Commission, male and female, but only white Caucasian people. On my Pathfinders board, which is our volunteer board, I have one Black woman who's been on there for a long, long time because she knows she's the only Black woman who's been on the board. And so she tries to help us out by continuing to do that. I have a couple of different volunteer groups, and one of them is called Ambassadors. And they put on a yellow vest and they walk along the Greenway and they report problems to the locality, or they help people find their way. My personal bias is against people who cannot get anywhere without the map on their phone. I had a training session for medical school students. I mean, these are people who are in medical school. And they said, well, how do you get to the Greenway? I said, let's walk out the door. We're standing here. You walk down the steps, you go across the street. I said, you see that bridge over there, block away? Yep. I said, go over the bridge and you're on the Greenway. What's the address? I said, it doesn't have an address. It's a long green, it's only got an address at parking lots. Well, how am I going to put it in my phone? I said, you don't have to put it in your phone. Go down the steps, across the street, across that field, and you're there. Oh, well, I need to put it in my phone. I mean, these are highly educated people and they can't go anywhere without having, so sorry, that was a little rant about my bias. But so my action is I want to take this ambassador group, and they meet quarterly, and we do, I mean, they go on the Greenway all the time, every week, but they meet quarterly, and we do things like first aid training and, other stuff like that. But what I want to do is recruit some of them to engage in conversations on the Greenway to recruit more ambassadors, because I never go on the Greenway without seeing people of color, whether they're Asians or Indians or, African Americans or whatever, but we don't have any of those in our ambassador group, which are sort of, they're serving as a friendly ambassador, but they're also a little bit of a patrol. So we certainly should not want our patrolling people to be all white, right? So my anticipated result is that we would have a more diverse ambassador group. The impact is probably low, but it's a start. Time frame is probably medium because we don't have another scheduled meeting till August, and it would probably be November meeting before we might actually get some more people. And no, I haven't started, but I've acknowledged the problem, right?
That's totally okay. Yeah, that's the whole point, is that just know where you are. It's just about knowing where you are and knowing where you want to be. And we're just so excited to hear back about the progress that you'll be taking on recruiting new ambassadors. That's exciting. So we're almost at the top of the hour, but I thought I'd just share this really quick, if I can kind of try to see if we can land the plane, so to speak. We talked about empathy in the beginning, and also broke that into how this happens as an individual in our organizations and partners, that we begin where we are, whether it's just a emotional or head level empathy, to feeling it and moving ourselves to action. And we were able to take that and see the example of what Virginia has been doing to identify actions and a plan, and then also to create our own system of how we break it down, to recognize that change happens on all three of these levels, and identifying actions for ourselves, for our organizations, and in our partnerships and community. I hope that this was helpful in finding out where you might start. Just want to say thanks for joining us. Nathan and Risa, I also want to give you space to say a last word too, if before we kind of close out today.
The fact that you guys stuck it out with us from 1 o'clock until now, I think really speaks about speaks volumes about this, this effort and this work, quite honestly. And I'm just excited about, where we as a state and as a country will be going because so many people are now engaged in this work. So thank you all.
Yeah, I want to thank my partners who've been working on this literally for a couple of years now. But thank you, Liz and Greg. You get a star literally for staying with us for so long. But also, I'm particularly excited to have not just what the One Virginia plan seeks to do, but what it provides as the tools. Because I have seen DEI discussions, you know, many of them for a year now that are all important, but many of them I'll either leave thinking, okay, so somebody's unhappy, so there's a problem. So what can I do? So this addressed the what can I do, and I think that if you know, we sort of tattoo that dashboard on our foreheads and try it periodically with our groups, it can make a difference. And we might not be able to check the box and say, yeah, we fixed us, you know, in our lifetimes, but the tool is really powerful. So I'm thrilled to have been able to learn it and to have worked with these guys to share it. And so appreciate you guys for everything, and Jack for helping out too.
Absolutely.
You made it easy for us.
Huge thank you to Jack for sticking out through with us and keeping an eye on us for the back end.
No, it's been great. Thank you all so much for your work.
All right. Thanks so much.
Guys, thank you all.
What a great way to start the symposium.
Definitely. Well, thanks, y'all. Enjoy the rest of the conference, what you're going to be a part of, and keep an eye on the silent auction if you have any interest in the items on there. And otherwise, yeah, enjoy everything else. Good seeing y'all.
I have a question about the auction, Jack.
Yeah.
I couldn't find anywhere in the materials how people pick stuff up. And if everyone's virtual, where is the kayak that I might buy? I mean, you know, is it in Richmond? I don't want to drive to Richmond to get it.
So there's two. It says it for a lot of the items, it'll say whether or not the company or the owner will pay to ship it. But in the case of there's a kayak that is in South Carolina that you have to go pick up or call the owner. She said she'll drive it to Richmond. Actually, it's a used Crossfire. And then there's a brand new kayak that's in North Carolina, and you can either go to pick it up or call them, and then we'll try to figure out how to get it to you. If it were to Roanoke, we'll get it to Roanoke if you bought that one.
Liz, I actually live really close to both of those. I live a few miles from the Liquid Logic factory and not too far from South Carolina. So if you happen to win it, my folks live in Virginia and I'm up there a lot. So I encourage you to bid high and bid often, and don't let to not let the transportation of it, you know, be an issue, because I'm happy to help get it to you if need be.
Thank you.
Cool. All right.
Okay. See you
Thanks,
guys.
y'all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Great work. Bye.
I think I end this thing. All right.
Yeah, it's good
You
work.
can just
guys.
leave. See you guys. We'll follow up.
Yeah.
Go breathe.
Okay. Yay.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.